normally record about an hour and a half earlier than I'm recording tonight, but I'm really sad I'm at the end of season one. Hey, it's Romania Black, and I'm so sad that I'm at the end of season one of the Apothecary Diaries because, this season has been so good. So I'm not only sad about that, but I have reached the last chapter of The Last Eunuch in China, which we'll talk about here in a little bit, and I've got some comments that I want to talk about. But thank you for following me on the journey for season one. The good news is that in only a few weeks, we'll have season two. So I know I'm recording this ahead of time. I'm wanting to try to record ahead for the channel. I will tell you that the comments I'm going to look at today are for episodes 19 and 20. But I am going to hold off. Next week, you all are going to see that we are going to look at the little chibi shorts that I have been told about by Matilda Nightcore. So I am going to react to those next week. And I'm actually going to wait a couple weeks since recording this and let the comments come in. And I'll probably, around the time that episode 23 is on Patreon, episode 24 is on, or episode 22 is on YouTube, I'll do the shorts. And then any other comments from episodes 23, we will have going into season two. Now, I'm probably going to keep Apothecary Diaries on Wednesday, and I know that that's going to seem really weird because supposedly the episodes are coming out on Fridays, and you all will be like, what? I have to wait on Patreon till Wednesday of the next week? And there's some reasons why I want to do that. I'm doing a show live every week right now, and it's okay because I'm not traveling a lot on the weekends, so it's okay. But in the spring, I travel quite a bit on the weekends, like a lot. And that travel is not Saturday and Sunday, but usually Fridays and Saturdays. So what will probably happen is I won't be able to record if the new episode of the Apothecary Diaries comes out on Fridays. I'm probably not going to be able to even record them until Sunday at the earliest. So I'm going to have them probably staying on Wednesdays. So that'll give you time to watch the episodes before the reaction. It'll give you time to think about it. It'll give me time. So if I'm gone, I can kind of plan ahead. So we'll probably just keep the Apothecary Diaries on Wednesday. As of right now, I think there's 1 week that's going to be in between the start of the reactions and here, but I'll find an extra or something to take its place. Don't worry. Don't you worry. So we'll get that all planned out, and I'll be talking about that obviously in the January update video. But let's get into this and these comments. So I want to talk real quick about The Last Eunuch in China. The last chapter is pretty somber. Chapter 15 is called A Gravestone in Silence. And it basically talks about the author and their relationship with Sun Yao-ting. And they kind of forged this relationship over a long period of time, saying that Sun Yao-ting, you know, what I heard from this ailing old man was not only the personal sufferings inflicted upon him by the feudal system, but bad luck too. His story was a history of the late Qing dynasty told from his unique perspective. After thinking it over, I came up with a long scroll of paintings depicting events that took place during the past 100 years and the folklore of the cities of Beijing and Tianjin. I wanted to record down the arduous life of Sun Yao-ting, so I confined myself within the room and began to write his story. I would sit at the desk for 16 hours a day when the high summer temperatures rose to 37 or 38 degrees centigrade. I continued to write even when I ran a fever of 39 degrees and suffered from persistent diarrhea. I was racing with time because I had made a promise to publish the biography before the old man died. And so he had wanted to get a draft out before Sun Yao-ting had passed so he could show him. And what he ended up doing was that Puji, who was the brother of the emperor, he got him to write the foreword. And then he showed that to Sun Yao-ting, and Sun Yao-ting was like, what? He's like, are you kidding? And he says, I never thought the second master would write the preface for this book. I was only his bondservant. It's true what they say, one will become known far and wide as soon as he has made a name. And so they published the book. And then, of course, he writes here saying that Sun Yao-ting became very famous and he had many visitors from abroad. He became known as a quote-unquote national treasure. He was the only authority left in China who had lived through the last years of the Qing imperial court. And apparently there was a film about another eunuch that was made, and the director and leading actor like paid him a visit and did all of this. So there's a lot of stuff going on. But around the time
He said that the author actually fell ill in the second half of 1992 and was confined to his bed. One day, he said a servant came to his house and told his mother that the master had sent him over to find out where the author lived. He wanted to deliver some salted eggs. The servant brought the eggs to me and gave the author a message from Sun Yao Ting saying, "Let them try the meatballs. I cook them according to the standards of the imperial kitchen. They are different from those sold on the street." Which is really nice. And so Sun Yao Ting, while he's sick, was called over to, or while the author was sick, he was called over to see Sun Yao Ting, and he thought that maybe Sun Yao Ting was dying. That wasn't exactly the case, but Sun Yao Ting told him that he had a dream of the author. He couldn't tell what was happening in the dream, but the author said he saw tears shimmering in Sun Yao Ting's eyes. As the author was about to leave, Sun Yao Ting told him that in his dream, the author had died and was laid on a bare wooden bed. No matter how hard he had tried, he couldn't wake the author up. He became so worried that he called the author at his home immediately because he was worried he might be dead. But then Sun Yao Ting burst into a smile and said, "From ancient times, people have been saying, what one dreams goes contrary to reality. Death is living. I know it is an omen of your sure recovery." The author says, "I don't know if it was because of the old man's auspicious remarks or not, but I recovered from an illness which the doctors had deemed hopeless." So I'd never heard of that. I'd never heard of whatever happens in your dreams is contrary to reality. That's kind of crazy, but I'm going to look into my dream journal and think about that. So in any case, Sun Yao Ting talks about how he wanted to go back to his birthplace before he died and to be buried in his hometown. But the author talks about how Sun Yao Ting had made all of these arrangements for his death, and he wanted to be buried in his native village. But apparently that was a more difficult task than originally thought. So they go through a bunch of different things, and I'm going to just get to the very end. It said on the very end, what does the author say here? I get really emotional getting to this part because it was really sad. Like I almost cried reading this the other night. I was like, no. It said December 18th. It was in the same year. I was attending a conference with Chinese writers. Someone came over and told my family that they wanted me to return home immediately. I called and learned that Sun Yao Ting had died. And there's some stuff that happens before this, but you can go read the book for that. I rushed to the temple and I learned the previous night Sun Yao Ting had asked his servant for an apple. The servant said, "An apple is tough to bite. Can you eat it? Let me boil some water with a pear in it. The juice will be good for you." The old man nodded in approval. After the old man had drunk the pear water, his servant went up to tidy things in the outer room while talking to him in the inner room. When the servant could no longer hear Sun Yao Ting's voice for a long while, he went in and saw Sun Yao Ting's head tilted to one side. He had died. At 6:50 on... Oh, Sam gets so emotional. It's really sad. Aw. At 6:50 on the afternoon of December 17th, 1996, Sun Yao Ting, the last eunuch from Imperial China, died quietly in the Guanghua Temple by my God, in Beijing at the age of 94. Oh, I cried the other night reading it because it was like you'd followed this guy like throughout his entire life, and then suddenly he had passed away, and you're like, oh, it felt so final. It was like, oh, just heartbreaking. So I told myself before I started this I wasn't going to be emotional, and then that failed. So they had a ceremony and were able to give him a proper burial and everything, and then they had a museum and everything set up, and the rest is history. But oh my goodness, I told myself I wasn't going to cry getting to the end, but I did. When I read that, I had to like take a moment and be like, oh, because he was so sweet. And man, so I'm very glad that I read that story. And I'm glad you all enjoyed our little book club readings these last several weeks. I don't know if I will be reading a book alongside. I don't know if I'll be reading a book alongside season 2. If you all have any book recommendations you would recommend, I guess we can go from there. But I might ask Patreon or the Discord if they have any recommendations as well before this video comes out. But I really enjoyed The Last Eunuch of China. I had no clue what to think of it, and reading it alongside this was a lot of fun. So I know this is a long intro, but I'm stalling the inevitable. But anyway, I'm going to dry my eyes for a second. Oh my God. I told myself, I'm like, Romania, do not cry this evening talking about Sun Yat-ting's death. And go figure. Mm-hmm. All right. So I've got some chapters that we need, some comments that we need to talk about before we go any further. So I did want to make a note. I don't know if I talked about this in the discussion, but in episode 23, which the episode title is Balsam and Wood Sorrel, Fengxian is likened to balsam and MAOMAO to wood sorrel. I didn't know if I had mentioned that in the comments, so I want to make sure that was clear. HBanana7 for episode 19 says that MAOMAO is totally speaking to Jinshi without any form of honorifics when he offered the bribe. I just found that bit of detail hilarious. Yeah, she got so worked up by the damn Bezor that she forgot to use honorifics, and Jinshi was like, not ready for what he was about to experience, which is great. Also, for episode 19, QMOG 3088 says, I think Lakan knew that it was Jinshi who was inside the building performing the ceremony. In episode 16, Lakan told Jinshi the late metalworker's latest work was so beautiful. It was just a simple metal part, but it'd look awesome if it was used in a ritual ceremony. And Jinshi thinks to himself, a eunuch has nothing to do with the ceremony, so he knows who I really am. So that is a good point. That is a good tie-in that he could possibly have known that Jinshi was the one in the ceremony the entire time, which makes him walking out with MAOMAO in that moment all the more insane. I do think episodes 19 and 23 are my two favorites so far. I love them for very different reasons, but they're both kind of my favorites going into this season finale. We'll see how the season finale goes, but Read the Best, we'll talk about their novel differences here in a little bit for episodes 18 and 19. Sarah, C4G on episode 19 says, the author on Twitter or in an interview confirmed that Lakan had the guard from episode 19 that hit MAOMAO tortured, since there was no confirmation of what happened in the novel or the manga. So there you go. That's supposedly the answer that the author said on social media about that. Be Happy says with episode 20, okay, so Romania, now that you are about to finish season 1 of Apothecary, here are the elements I wanted to tell you about from before. The salty wood plates in the beginning were used only by Lady Fengmin to communicate with her family, and as we never touch base with that again, I wanted to ease your mind about it. Thank you. I know that all the time. I'm like, sometimes stories have little elements that kind of just wander off and are plot lines that never get picked back up again, and I'm like, did that ever have any meaning? And sometimes you just never know, so it's good to get confirmation on that, so I'm not going to be like, although it is good now to know that that's not tied to Lolan or anything like that. It's just, it was a plot line, it's been done, and now we're good to go. MAOMAO says for episode 20, I'm living for Gaoshun being the ultimate husband material out of everyone in the series. Same. Jinshi is pretty to look at. And Labrador man Lihaku's got them biceps, but I need, and this is what got me, I need that emotionally stable, well-employed, weeds the garden type of man. I feel like Jinshi and Lihaku are like the young men that were like, oh, they'd be great. Gaoshun is the husband. He is the guy that at the end of the day, you're like, oh, wait, never mind. Also, for Gaoshun being a grandpa, he can get it. I'm in my mid-30s, so I'm going through a very weird transition in my life where I'm no longer like you reach a certain time in your 30s where guys in their 20s start to get, or if you're a guy or a girl or whatever, people in their 20s start to maybe get less appealing, and then, but you're like, well, I don't want somebody that's the same age as my parents, but then it's like a little bit older than me. It's weird. Dating in your 30s or even contemplating it is weird. So I would go for Gaoshun. I'd be like, are you sure you're married? Are you sure about that? But anyway, so Read the Best, Amy Powell 5064 as well for one part of this. Read the Best has some notes from the novel, and the moderators have been really good about this because I don't want to know too much about the novel, to be honest, because I don't want to be spoiled. But the moderators have gone through and been like, okay, Rhett's just talking about things that were left out of those specific chapters that will probably not be adapted because that was in the moment. I'm okay with that. I just don't want to know future events or things tied to characters that I'm going to figure out in the future. So Rhett's been really good about that. So Rhett the Best says, there are some small things with episode 18 from the light novel that the anime leaves out. For instance, it talks about in volume 1 when it's discovered that MAOMAO's freckles are fake, some of them are actually tattooed on, but very lightly. Her dad stopped her from making them darker or more of them. It doesn't say this, but I got the impression that he walked in on her when he started and stopped her. And now that we know that Loman is Lakan's uncle, it's like, has a whole nother layer to it, right? He's like, stop it, you're just like your dad. You know, the woman in the annex, which we now know as Fengxian, also in the novel, has no nose. So far in the light novel, all the bath scenes that were in episode 18 are non-existent. I don't know if they were added in by the anime or the manga. It also states that at this point, MAOMAO has been working for Jinshi for 2 months. The conversation between Pyron and the grandmother doesn't happen like it does in the anime, and it cuts from Loman telling MAOMAO to take the medicine to the woman in the annex to MAOMAO being in the annex. So I guess they just probably added that scene with Pyron and the grandmother in there, maybe just for some context or to fill time or to later connect to Lihaku in that scene, possibly. But the fact that she doesn't have a nose adds a lot to the whole beauty and the idea of the price of beauty and how people are supposed to look as a courtesan. Adds a lot to it. She got the Tyrion Lannister treatment, basically. The order of the scenes in this episode of episode 18 are mixed up from the order in the novel, but they're all there. The only big difference is Lakan visits Jinshi twice. The first time is a discussion about the brothers from the previous case, and he encourages Jinshi to ask someone about how to lower the value of a courtesan. Then, the conversation between MAOMAO and Jinshi about how to lower the value of a courtesan happens. The second time Lakan visits, Jinshi is in the conversation shown in the anime. It's practically verbatim. The only difference is that Lakan gets so angry he takes off his monocle, wipes it off, and puts it on the other eye. I guess he uses it to hide himself, similarly to how MAOMAO uses her freckles. So the monocle is basically just for show, right? Just for show to make him maybe seem weaker than he is. That's interesting, though. That's interesting that they split the conversation up. And then Rhett the Best says for episode 19, there is a kind of cute moment where MAOMAO phrases in the novel that they left out of the show, and I'm not sure that I like the choice. Okay, I don't like this choice either. So if you don't want episode 19, MAOMAO's selflessness in going to the temple to stop the thing, if you don't want that altered in any way, shape, or form, I'm going to put a little light novel spoiler up here because I'm about to say something, and I totally agree with Rhett the Best on this. I don't like it. So you've been spoiled. You've been warned. There are light novel spoilers for episode 19 up here. You can just skip this if you don't want your perception of episode 19 altered in any way. But they say in the book, MAOMAO, as she was antagonizing the guard, to quote the book, says, "I have to get in there. It would be too late once everything was over. Too late. If she didn't get in there right now, then I'll never get my Ox Bezor." She wasn't thinking about saving someone's life, just getting the Ox Bezor. And the noble person was very much a secondary concern. She also mentions thinking about going to get Gaoshin or Jinshi to try to stop the ceremony, but then remembers that they'll be quote-unquote out all day. When she was bleeding on the ground after getting hit, there was an audible gasp from the crowd, and MAOMAO thinks that maybe the blood is because it's on sacred ground and it's blasphemous or something. The asking Gaoshin thing was only like a third of a thought MAOMAO had in the book. She says that she wanted to ask Gaoshun to use his bathtub to take a bath because she wasn't going to bathe in the same tub that Jinshi uses. There's also this other line that makes it sound like a metal rod could have possibly gone through her leg, but it's not mentioned again in the description, so I don't know if it's a translation issue or what. So I think that is sweet that she doesn't want to use the same bathtub that Jinshi does because she views herself as less. You know, we've talked about that previously. My thing is, I'm really glad that the anime, that's actually usually when I see the source material compared to the adaptation, I think the source material is better. But this is one of those rare instances where I'm kind of glad that the anime didn't have her have that internal monologue because it kind of, in a negative way, makes me think less of MAOMAO in the moment, that she only went in there to get the Ox Bezor. Now, on the one hand, does that seem more in character for her? Yeah. It does seem more in character for her trickery-ness, but at the same time, I kind of like it making her seem more noble in the moment too, and the anime just making it seem more epic and noble without making it a comedy moment, you know? So I actually agree with Red. I don't exactly like the way that the author did that scene, but end of those spoilers. But it is what it is. So it doesn't affect my overall view of MAOMAO at all. It's just interesting to note. But yeah, y'all, I know that I seem scattered and all over the place right now, but that's because I can't believe we're on the season finale. I'm really just kind of baffled. If I'm being honest, I'm kind of baffled. I don't want to be at the end of season 1. I hate that it's the last episode, but I'm also really excited. And I'm not heartbroken because we still have season 2. Now, if this had been the end of season 2 and we weren't going to get Apothecary Diaries for a while, call me in about 3, well, we got 24 episodes, I think, or 2 cores. Call me when season 2's over and we'll talk. Because I have a feeling that my views are going to be different. So I'm excited, though. I'm so full of frantic energy, y'all. Thank you so much for watching the Apothecary Diaries with me. I'm so excited to start season 2 in a little bit, but we need to get done with season 1 first. So with that being said, we are going to start episode 24 of the Apothecary Diaries. Oh my gosh. And we're going to do that here in 3, 2, 1, and let's do it to it. So, I didn't expect to cry in this final episode. Nope. Did I expect to cry? Absolutely not. But here we are. Oh my God. There's a lot to talk about with Lakan and MAOMAO, but man, girl, you don't know how much you get from your father. You really don't. Because MAOMAO, there's so much that what's interesting is we could talk about like how much MAOMAO is aware and how much MAOMAO chooses to ignore, because there are definitely things that MAOMAO knows and she believes she knows the answer to, but she always, the one frustrating thing about Mao is that she always kind of like backs it up with, oh, who knows? Who cares? And I'm like, you are very similar to your dad and you don't even realize it. So a lot of what we talked about last week ended up happening, which was really great, but it did not happen in the way that I expected it to, which was really interesting. So Lakan seeing the withered blue rose, he gives to mind to us that he just wanted to be with the daughter that Fengxian left behind. So all he wanted was MAOMAO to be with him. That's what he's wanted, because he feels he feels responsible, right? He feels responsible for what happened to Fengxian and for her deteriorating mental state, because he wasn't around and he didn't put 2 and 2 together to figure out that she was pregnant before he was shipped abroad. And that affected him not being able to communicate with her because he didn't think much of it. He just thought, oh, I'll be gone. And then he was like, well, it's been 3 years, but she'll understand. And that wasn't the case, right? But what's interesting is like, that was my only wish. What's interesting is that MAOMAO, she brought Lakan to the brothel to finish out their deal. So she brought him there. She knew that she thought there was a chance that he would pick the mom. And I think she knew that. But MAOMAO's whole thing is that she is so clinical, or tries to be so clinical, that she tries to remove herself. I guess we need to put that up here. She tries to remove her own emotions concerning in the issue. She tries to look at it through this objective lens, this Sherlock objective lens. But the thing is, MAOMAO is a bit more emotional than Sherlock. And MAOMAO does have feelings, but she's trying to repress them and hide them, which makes her very similar to Jinshi in a lot of ways, because Jinshi tries to repress and hide his emotional, feelings about certain situations, and MAOMAO is trying to do the same. So, if MAOMAO only knew all the stuff about Jinshi that we know, then we'd be like, look, MAOMAO, you and Jinshi can commiserate together in your circumstances, but they're not there yet. One thing I do like about this series is it is a romance in a way. It's a mystery, it's historical, it's a romance, it's a drama, but it does romance in a way that is satisfying to me. There are so many shows that romance bait, and I hate it. Like, you think it's gonna have romance and then it doesn't, and they tease that there's gonna be romance and then there's not, and you're like, just give us some sex, damn it. And in this show, they don't bait us. They give us Lakan and Fengxian. Now, granted, it gets her syphilis in the end, but they give us this romance, and that whole scene, oh my God, when we talk about it, if I don't break down again, they actually give us the romance to go with it. It may come in unexpected ways, like with Pyron and Lihaku, and with Fengxian and Lakan, but it does happen. And what I like is that there is a tiny, little tiny seed of romance that has been planted in this season between, as the episode is called, Jinshi and MAOMAO. There's a little tiny seed. She doesn't, and what I like about it is it doesn't force anything. Jinshi has a lot to figure out about himself, like what he wants to do. Does he want to be the heir or not? How does he cement himself not doing that? He's got his own things to take care of to make sure that his father, ends up with an heir of their own. So Jinshi has a lot to worry about. And then there's the whole thing with Lolan and her dad, and they seem suspicious. I tell you, between this show and Arcane, these people, these noble dignitaries and their parents coming out of the woodwork to cause shit. Am I right? So, but I do feel like what is good about this season, and that I'm excited for with season 2, is that this season not only plants the seed between Jinshi and MAOMAO, but it also establishes the fact that Jinshi and MAOMAO, they got a lot to work on with themselves. MAOMAO has her whole thing with her dad this season, and she also has to figure out like what she's going to do moving forward, and then Jinshi has to figure out what he's doing moving forward. So their romance between the two of them, it feels very natural. It feels like it's progressing in subtle but noticeable ways. And it doesn't feel forced. It doesn't feel unnatural. It doesn't feel like the writer is just making this happen. Everything, it's slow. It's a slow burn. But look, I can do a slow burn. As long as there's some fire by the end, I can do a slow burn. I can handle that. As long as we get little embers of flickering as we go, I'm going to be fine with that. I can do that. I've read several slow burns and I'm okay with that. So that's fine by me. But, so we got this flashback where we saw Loman, and of course there's MAOMAO picking the wood sorrel. Are you freaking kidding me, anime? And she has her little buns. And he says it's only natural for her to hate him. So Lakan believes that MAOMAO hates him. And he believes that that is natural. He's like, if I were looking at this on paper, I would probably think the same. And so meanwhile, MAOMAO says that she does not hate him, but she doesn't like him. She doesn't like him, and she only recognizes Loman as her dad, which we'll get more into that. Now, again, MAOMAO's whole thing is that she thinks she knows all of the stuff, when the reality is she doesn't, because in this flashback, MAOMAO is too young to fully remember all the details. But he says here, he's like, I still wanted her near me. And he shows him holding the finger. And like the fact that Loman is sitting there with her and he's like reaching for her with a trembling hand. Like the fact that Lakan met her before when she was a kid, and she probably remembers him. So, but what I'm curious about is Loman, like I'm sure she made her own assumptions, right? Which we'll talk about that in the episode. But him reaching for her and seeing like his eyes in her. But then I love that he's covered in shadow there and we only see his back. He's like, but a bet is a bet. I'll have to try again another time. Now, at this point, he has no clue about the mom being alive. has no clue she's alive. He thinks that his daughter's tricked him. He's got to buy out this courtesan. He's like, I'll try again another time to see my daughter. It'll be fine. What gets me is that in this moment, he's like, but that man, oh my God. When he's like, I'll never forgive him. Oh, because he sees the advisor with his hand. And then with the fact that Lakan's like, he had his hand on her shoulder 3 times during the match. He's like, how will I take my revenge? Oh no! Jinshi has made an enemy out of his father-in-law and doesn't even realize it. So he has sworn revenge on Jinshi. Like, how dare he put his hands on my daughter? Oh my God, being like the doting dad. And the part that's so insane about it is he can't tell what expression or emotion Jinshi is showing. He can't tell if Jinshi is sad or happy or concerned. He doesn't know. He just knows that this man who his daughter is working for, who might be related to the emperor, is putting his hands on her. And he's like, how inappropriate. Hilarious. But then MAOMAO shows up. Well, no, the granny shows up. And the granny's like, you're buying out one of our courtesans. Now, here's the thing that's so crazy. At first, he's like, well, I'll spend 10,000, 20, 30, whatever, but, no more than 100,000. That'd be too much. And the moment then that he sees Fengxian, he's like, I'll pay whatever you want. I'll buy out whatever you want. Oh. She's like, I'll let you have your pick. Now, the grandmother... the woman, I call her the grandma, but the woman that owns the brothel, she didn't know that Fengxian was on the table. She had no clue. And that surprised me because I thought that MAOMAO had approved this through MAOMAO and the others and the woman that owns the brothel. I thought that MAOMAO had approved all this because the woman was kind of like, well, sure, she can go. It saves us the trouble of taking care of her. But what I actually like about it is the woman that owns the brothel, she does have a attachment to Fengxian to an extent that she was like, wait, what? No, don't let him see her. But MAOMAO, what I love about it is MAOMAO knows the relationship between them. And she knows that when Lakan goes down there, she's standing in front and she's the only one with massive boobs. So she's pretty easy to spot and pick out. And she wears the same clothes, so he probably can tell. But he knows in this moment, she knows that he's going to pick her. Because she's the only one that he even remotely knows who is and has an attachment to. So MAOMAO knows that he's going to pick her. And I don't blame MAOMAO for being like, I'm not the one you want. But it's a stroke of genius, her opening up the gates. And then at that moment, to where he can hear her singing... She's like, I pride my work as a courtesan, but it's your choice, so choose well. And she knew that he actually loved her. And so when he heard her singing, he would run after her. That's what she knew. And she set all these doors up to be the perfect tunnel to hear that sound and hear her singing. And honestly, I know that MAOMAO doesn't want to recognize it because she doesn't like Lakan. And I don't blame her for not wanting to recognize it. And I don't blame her and say she's a bad person for thinking this. But the reality is that Lakan, him choosing Fengxian, I'm sure that MAOMAO, unfortunately, if we're going to come up here and think, I'm sure she thinks that it is out of obligation or guilt. Because MAOMAO has a very transactional understanding of love because of her being raised in the brothels. She believes that love is transactional. So she probably thinks that if Fengxian is chosen by Lakan, it's not because he loves her, but it's because he feels guilty or feels pity for her or wants to atone for his sins or settle a debt. And that's probably part of it, but I don't think MAOMAO fully believes, like we the audience can see, that he loves her. That he loves her more than anything. And I'm getting emotional just thinking about it all over again. Because it wasn't him running towards her that got me. Because I was like, oh, the song, he wants to see her. And his expression and everything.
And he's like, that's what the flower, it retaining its beauty even if it's withered. Is that what it is? And then he runs in and sees her. And for a while, the animation, until they show us her face perfected, which we'll get to, it does show that like her nose is missing. And he walks in and sees her. Mm-hmm. And then seeing her on the bed, like, he's not repulsed. He isn't disgusted. He sees her and he cries because he didn't think she was alive. And then he immediately like goes to her side and he's like, this is the one. He's like, this is the one I'm going to choose. And him just like him on his knees at her bedside, looking up at her as if he's in reverence of her. I've said that MAOMAO's a lot like Lakan. Jinshi is a lot like Lakan in this respect. In this respect of revering the woman that they love, Jinshi and Lakan would be very, very similar. And Lakan just doesn't realize it. But oh my God. He's like, I want this woman. And they're like, oh, stop this nonsense. He said, you could pick anyone that I want. He's like, and I'll pay whatever you ask, 100, 200,000, whatever. That got me, because I was like, oh, it's the parallel where he's immediately contradicting. And Mei-Mei's like, no. Mei-Mei's like, let this happen. And then him getting out the go stones to play with her. And the thing about it is, I think everyone in the room, MAOMAO and everyone, knows that she is not going to live long. I wonder, did she die at the end? Was it her funeral that they were doing? Because they dressed her in that? Was that it? We're going to go back to that scene if she actually died. But he takes her hand and gives her the stones. And him holding her hand. Because when she turns her head and looks away, she has all the marks and you can't see her nose. Like her hair hides it. So you wonder if she has in fact lost her nose, and they animate that way. But then when she looks down at the hand and the moonlight is there and she looks back at him, the thing that got me, like, oh, the thing that gets me is that she's perfect to him. Oh, and my dog doesn't care about my sympathies. The dog doesn't care. This is the most beautiful thing ever, that she was perfect to him. And I think that what sells it on that moment is that he can't see people's faces, but hers is the only face that he can see. But even when hers is the only face he can see, it's still beautiful and perfect. And him crying, being like, let's play go. And her giving the little happy face. I'm like, that. Show, why would you do that to me? Oh my God. It's just, oh, like I'm with Lakan. Like, he was so happy she was alive. And seeing him show that emotion, he's such a baka. And I wish MAOMAO could have seen this, because MAOMAO thinks that it's not, her calling him a stud, like a stud stallion, is such an insult, I feel. And I wish MAOMAO could have seen how beautiful this is. Like, just, ugh. And that's one of MAOMAO's flaws, which I like. I like our protagonists having some flaws. They're not Mary Sue's. They get some flaws, and that's perfectly fine. But she just views Lakan as a stud and as a donor, and doesn't think he truly cares. I am curious later on down the road, because he said he would try again, and if she passes and everything, I do wonder down the road because Mei-Mei knows, like, they were all there when this went on. Mei-Mei knows how much he actually cares about Fengxian. And I wonder if down the road, if MAOMAO will say something about Lakan being just a stud and a donor, and Mei-Mei will be like, oh, no, you don't understand. And I wonder if she'll try to correct MAOMAO at some point, or if Lakan will do something to show that he does care about MAOMAO, and she'll have to reconcile with that. Which is hard, because I get where MAOMAO's coming from. This guy wasn't around you your whole life. She doesn't know the full story, but from her perspective, he's this deadbeat dad, and she doesn't understand why he's suddenly obsessed with her. But we know, as the audience, kind of the rest of the story. So, oh, geez. This whole moment here was just, and then playing Go. Like her final, like, she finally got to play one more game of Go with the man that she loved too, and
And of course, Mei Mei is like, big sister, you should have been honest from the start. Why so late? Yeah. And he's like, I will buy out this courtesan. Oh. This woman beautiful as a balsam flower. Oh, that got me too. Like, the symbolism, everything. Oh my God. Oh, show why you gonna make me cry. Oh, I'm like, MAOMAO, I wish you could see this and understand it, but that's just how it's gotta be. So then when Boston was like, what a terrible dad and mom, what a wicked father-daughter duo, I thought he was talking about MAOMAO and Lakan for a second, and I was like, hold on, Boston. But no, he was talking about Lolan and the dad. Now, what's important to note is that MAOMAO is an unreliable narrator at times, because she tells Jinshi later on, she's like, oh, I'm not tired, I'm fine. And here in front of Basin or Boston or however you would say his name, I'm too emotional. She, in that moment, she's like, oh, I'm really tired. So I'm like, the frustrating thing about MAOMAO is sometimes you gotta kind of mince words and be like, how serious is she being? But they're like Lolan, the concubine Lolan and her dad. She does kind of look like her dad a little bit. You can see it, right? The one pushed hard to get her daughter in the rear palace. What's interesting is we have all these father-daughter relationships. Like we have the emperor with Jinshi's niece/sister. And so you have the emperor and Gyoku's daughter. You have Lakan and MAOMAO. You have Lolan and MAOMAO. You have this man and Lolan. Like there's all these father-daughter relationships that are being shown in this. And I'm going to be really curious because like we've noted the second half of the season, they're going to save Lolan and her dad for season 2. So I'm going to be curious to see like what their dynamic ends up being like. And if it's going to have any connection for MAOMAO and Lakan or something like that. But she's like, I wish this guy would quit bad mouthing high-ranking officials in public. She's like, I don't want to have guilt by association. Oh, MAOMAO, you're brutal. And then she says, he's still young. I'm like, girl, he's older than you. So then they go back to Jinshi's. And I love that Jinshi, being ever the doting could-be boyfriend, is like, you look really tired. And she's like, no, not really. I'm like, bitch, you said you were tired 2 seconds ago. Don't lie to us. Don't lie to us. It's like, no, not really. And then Suiren's like, oh, no, we cannot stand for this. You're going to have to eat some food and get something in you. You're so malnourished. I love it. Also, this spread would dig in, right? I love Suiren. Suiren and Gaoshun at this point are so trying to matchmake Jinshi and MAOMAO. They are pushing it on. But MAOMAO is going to be a hard customer. She's like, eat food or I'll kill you. And so Jinshi's like, I thought you hated Lakan. Like to let him go so easy. And then I like that Jinshi just shows up in his evening pajama wear, like just ready to have a conversation. He's missing a glass of milk and he'd be ready to go. She's like, it's not that I hate him. She's like, the way that she minces words, she tries to push the denial so much. And Jinshi's like, But also Jinshi, what I like about this conversation is he doesn't prod too much because it's kind of not his business. So he's just trying to be like, really? You think that? But she's basically like, well, I can't hate him because I'm here. I exist because of him. So she's like, it's just facts. And she says, I'm not sure how you imagined it, but she would have gotten pregnant if she would not have gotten pregnant if she didn't want to. Yeah, we talked about this last week in the discussion, but MAOMAO basically confirms that Fengxian wanted to get pregnant. She wanted to be a mom, but then he disappeared for 3 years and it all kind of went to hell after that. Like she was expecting him to come back and be with her. And she's like, she gave birth because she wanted to. Or rather, perhaps he was the one who was tricked. I mean, he was, because MAOMAO brings up a good point that we didn't talk about last week. And that's that you can sync up your cycles. Like women are clever And it's not hard to make a good estimate of when you're most likely to become pregnant. I mean, they have apps for that now. You can have apps that track, if you're a woman, it tracks like when your period's going to happen. It keeps track of like different cycles and helps you keep track of trends. And like, I have it myself because it will tell me, like, I usually during my period, like before and after, I get really bad headaches. It's just my body's reaction. So I can plug that in on an app and it will tell me, like, even if I don't keep track myself, it'll send me like a reminder, be like, you might have a headache today. And then you're like, oh shit, yeah, God. And you can kind of keep track of stuff like that. It also tracks like ovulation and stuff like that. If you were trying to get pregnant, you could keep track of that and know when and when not you are likely to get pregnant. Now, obviously, sometimes people have irregular cycles, some things work differently, but MAOMAO is very correct that you can kind of track when you're most likely to, if you really do the math and keep track of everything. Like it's more of just like a hobby science now, but it's always been something that's been something you could determine, right? You can track blood flow cycles. And as a courtesan, she was able to control. This is the part I didn't realize was we had talked last week about how she had wanted to get pregnant and wanted it to be him, but I hadn't even thought of the fact that she could have tracked her cycle. And he came every 3 months and she was like, here's when you're going to come and I'm going to time it right when you're going to arrive and I'm going to be good and ready. Like I hadn't thought about that, but that's exactly what happened. So MAOMAO knows that Fengxian desired this, but she lost her mind when things didn't work out. And I feel like that's part of MAOMAO not wanting to be romantic is because life often doesn't work out. I feel like MAOMAO is such a realist that it's hard for her to imagine like this idealistic romantic love, kind of like what Jinshi imagines sometimes, because she recognizes, well, the start of season 1, she was kidnapped and brought to the rear palace. Throughout this entire season, there's been so many instances where she's like, if one little thing had tweaked and changed, then someone else could have died or something else could have happened. So it's very unpredictable, but also sometimes things don't work out. And I feel that given MAOMAO's position, where she thinks her position is, and how she thinks it relates to Jinshi, I don't even think that the concept of her and Jinshi being in a relationship has crossed her mind because she thinks so little of herself that she's like, well, even if I did have a romantic interest in Jinshi, there's no way we could be together, right? So why should I even push it or pursue it? Because things aren't going to work out and it's just going to lead me to heartbreak and I don't have time to deal with that, right? Because she saw what happened to her mom. She saw that her mom wanted that romance with Lakan, and we saw how very easily family situations in this time and place in this era can cause that to not work and fall through. And MAOMAO's like, there's no way that I could, even if she gets to the point where she recognizes that she is attracted to Jinshi, I fear that she's going to be like, well, there's no way this is going to work because he's, who he is. So we'll see how that pans out, but it definitely sheds light on MAOMAO's state of how she feels about romance and all of this. She's like, and I think MAOMAO realizes, the dangers of love, because love, as she is thinking, can make you act unrationally and even hurt yourself and your own flesh and blood. Like MAOMAO's like, not only did love drive this woman to madness where she cut off her own finger, but she also cut off the pinky of her own kid. And for MAOMAO, that seems like a strike against romantic love, that she's like, yeah, this is what my mom did because of love and heartbreak. She's like, I really don't have time to deal with that. So then she says, that man never talks to you outside your office, does he? And she explained, and that was something else too. I didn't even think about that, but no, he doesn't talk to Jinshi outside the office because he knows who works there and he knows Jinshi's office and that it's going to be him he's talking to until he recognized his voice. And then when they had the match, then it was different. He can't view the parts together as a whole. So MAOMAO reveals that Loman told her that. My adopted father explained that to me as well. And we cut back to Loman saying he's an unfortunate fellow and it's troubled him all throughout his life. What's interesting is that when we cut back to MAOMAO this time, she's like, what? And she's older there. She's like, but for some reason, he's able to discern my face and my adopted father's. That's why he has that strange attachment to me. And what's so sad is that MAOMAO says she doesn't understand why he can see her face. And we're over here as the audience being like, because he loves you. And I feel like Gaoshun understands it. I feel like Gaoshun gets it. Gaoshun's over here like, because he loves you, dum-dum. Like, but, you know, it's not Gaoshun's place to tell MAOMAO any of this, of course. And she says, Jinshi, if that monocled man came at you and told you, call me Papa, how would you react? And Jinshi's like, he's like, I'd probably try to shatter that monocle. And Jinshi and MAOMAO both agree at this point. They're like, no, he's kind of creepy and I wouldn't go along with it. And she's like, exactly. And she's like, he keeps stressing he's my father, but he's a stud horse at best. Which is sad. And she's like, I wonder if he understood the message with the rose. Like, she even questions whether he would get it or not. But I'm like, girl, you know. You know. She's like, I dislike him, but I don't hate him. I'm grateful I was able to become Loman's daughter. I love that she recognizes Loman as her dad. That's so sweet. And Jinshi's like, well, you seem pretty disgusted when you saw him. And she's like, well, I love she tells Jinshi, you have a lot to learn. She tells the emperor's brother's son that he has a lot to learn. I'm like, girl, do you realize who this is? Clearly not. I'm like, who else is telling the emperor's like son brother that he has stuff to learn? What? When I tried to stop the ceremony, he helped me. And what gets me, she's like, I think he had the feeling that something was going to happen. Now, I do get with MAOMAO on this, where she's like, he knew that something was going to go down, and he didn't do anything until I got involved. She's like, he knew something was going to happen, but she's like, he's too lazy to do anything himself. Now, I don't know if he's too lazy or if he was just waiting to see if she would show up so that he could have this. I kind of disagree a little bit with MAOMAO in that moment, because she says it's because he's lazy, that he didn't do anything himself. And I'm like, I don't think that laziness is the word I would use for it. I think you could either say it was either apathy, he didn't care because it doesn't affect him. That would tie more back to the idea of him viewing people as just pieces on a chessboard. He's like, oh, I figured out the game, but I don't care. It doesn't affect me. Let these people have their crazy coup and do the whole thing with the ceremonies. Like, at the end of the day, I'm going to be fine. So why should I bother getting involved? Like, I feel like one, it could have been because of that. Not laziness, but apathy. And then two, I think it was because he knew that MAOMAO was being set up to figure out the mystery. And he wanted to wait and show up and be the heroic dad that came in to rescue his daughter, right? Like, she'd get pummeled by the guard. I'm sure he didn't mean for her to get hit like that, but I figured that he thought she'd get to the gate, they wouldn't let her in, and then he'd be like, oh, hey, you need in? Let your father with all the resources help you. But instead what happened was she got smacked in the face by the guard, and then he showed up. So to her, of course, it does not look like, I think, the way that Lakan wanted it to look, which is so interesting. And so she's like, if that guy actually took action. And the thing that gets me is that she's like, I could have had the resurrection drug in my hands right now. I'm like, no, girl, what? I love that she's like, I love that she gets all mad and Jinshi has no clue what's going on. He has no clue that she's thinking about Suirei right now. And she's like, I know this is just jealousy. He's so talented that my dad would praise him with no caveats. Oh, interesting. Interesting. So I'm assuming when she says my dad, she's talking about Loman, because Loman would be the only person she would recognize as her father, not Lakan. And I assume she's talking about Lakan being the one that Loman would praise with no caveats. So she refers to Loman as being incredibly talented,
but doesn't act on the talent. She's like, I could have gotten Suire in my clutches, found out what the resurrection drug was, did all of that. I could have had my hands over all of it, but no, you have all this talent and you're not using it. You're wasteful. He doesn't realize how blessed he is. That is an understatement. But yeah, I love MAOMAO being so frustrated in that moment. And then she's like, I love that Jinshi and Gaoxun are like, what? Girl, talk to us. And she's like, he'll never become your ally, but don't make him an enemy. Please. If possible. I like that she's like, he's never going to like you. And he's definitely, well, too late for Jinshi, because MAOMAO does not realize that now he is already Lakan's enemy. So Jinshi is going to suffer at Lakan's hands, probably in the future, whether we like it or not. And Jinshi's like, okay. I like that Jinshi also says understood. Like, MAOMAO's like, okay, don't get on his bad side, Jinshi. And he's like, okay. I'm like, you're the Emperor's brother son. Like, what? And you're taking orders from the apothecary. My favorite is that Gaoxun has been holding his tongue the entire time. And they're like, what's wrong? And he says, nothing, just... And I love that he looks to MAOMAO and says, please remember that no father wants to be disliked. I love that. The idea that no father wants to be disliked. Because here's the thing. MAOMAO, only has Loma to go off of as a father figure. Gaoxun is a father. That brings up the whole idea of the emperor and all of that. But I really hope that if MAOMAO gets too critical of Lakan at times in the future, that Gaoxun will like get a hold of her and be like, look, back off a second, think of it. Because Gaoxun can see this from the father's perspective. So he could probably understand where Lakan's coming from in a lot of this that MAOMAO can't exactly understand, right? And MAOMAO, she doesn't say anything to that. She just takes another bite of porridge like, well, I don't want to have to think about it. She doesn't want to admit that Gaoxun could be right. She doesn't answer that question. But I love that Gaoxun got that last word in, being like, look, your dad may be a deadbeat bastard at times, and he's weird, but he doesn't want you to dislike him. That's why he wanted you to be with him. And MAOMAO's like, quit making sense, Gaoxun. Stop it. So, in any case, a few days after she returned to the rear palace, Mei sent her a package. And it was a letter describing who bought out who. And a beautiful shawl. And so then she says, listen, MAOMAO, when I get bought out, you have to dance for me. So I like that she sent her the package saying, like, you're going to have to dance for me whenever it's time for that to happen. I wondered for a second if MAOMAO sent her the dress to wear to dance for her mom getting bought out, but obviously Mei's not getting bought out yet, but she's just sent it to MAOMAO to practice in. I almost felt like MAOMAO did the practice and all that as part of like, MAOMAO doesn't want to say it, but even though she claims she's practicing for when Mei is bought out, a part of me felt like this dance was to celebrate her mother getting bought out, because she knows that's what's happened. And it was part of just giving reverence without actually saying it, right? Because she puts on the makeup. She's like, I wanted to send off Mei. But that's not that courtesan kinder than anyone else. But that's not who we're sending off. We're sending off her mom. And so, of course, Jinshi's like, well, who could be on the rooftops? I also like that MAOMAO thought she was being sneaky. Like, sure, she had her jacket on and freckles. She's also wearing a dress underneath it with, like, her midriff showing. Like, girl, what do you think? A girl in a giant dress, flowy dress, climbing up a wall. She should know better. But yeah, her doing the dance. I love that there's a song to it. She looks so beautiful. I love how pretty she is with her leg and everything. And I love that she practices doing the dance. It's so pretty. It's so beautiful. I love it. And then, of course, she nearly falls.
And Jinshi, because Jinshi scares her, and then he shows up and grabs her to save her, which, I mean, at this point, of course he does. Of course he does. But then he's like, what are you doing? And she's like, well, why are you here? And he's like, well, because... And also when he says the guard reported somebody climbing on the wall, and she's like, I thought I was being sneaky. And he gives her the head pat, and he's like, stop causing trouble. And then when she asks, why did you have to be the one to investigate? I love that we got the idea that the guard was like, I have to tell Jinshi now. Like, every guard there knows that if they see MAOMAO, they have to go tell Jinshi. Every guard there, MAOMAO, I don't think realizes that everyone's on high alert for her for his sake, which is hilarious to me. And he's like, you think you're keeping a low profile, but not everyone agrees. Remember that. I love that they tell each other in this episode what to do. She's like, don't make an enemy out of my dad. And he's like, quit thinking you can sneak around when you can't. Like, I love that both of them are just like chiding each other. It's super cute. And I love they have this communication. I'm like, yes, talk things out. Talk out amongst yourselves. And he asks, why are you on the roof dancing? And she says, in the pleasure district, when you send off a courtesan who's been bought out, it's customary for the other courtesans to dance. And he's like, well, I'm surprised you know how to dance since you're not technically a courtesan. And she's like, well, I, have been around the brothels my whole life. I love it. She's like, well, if I have to explain things, I was taught dancing as part of the bare minimum of education. And he's like, well, there are rumors on the outside that the weirdo was buying out a courtesan. And she's like, I'm sure there were. I love that she doesn't want to. I love that Jinshi kind of knows that MAOMAO, is involved in Fengxian and Lakan's whole situation, but he doesn't want to say it directly. And she doesn't want to admit it directly. Because Jinshi's like, well, there are rumors he bought out a courtesan and he sent a notice of leave and he's going to take a vacation of at least 10 days. She's like, what a troublesome man. Like, I like in that moment that MAOMAO's like, wow, he's taking all that time off. He's probably causing a lot of trouble for you all. And Jinshi's like, well, my elder sister told me the banquet isn't just for 3 days or 3 nights, but 7 days and 7 nights. Like a whole week of celebration. She's like, there's no way to know how much he spent on that courtesan. But just from the number of lamps being put out, it's natural to assume that it's no ordinary courtesan. My thing here was that when she is there with her hands, the actual courtesan being bought out is never seen in public. The thing is, we don't see her face. I'm wondering the way that her hands are folded over her and she's in that gown with all the vines and everything. I'm like, did she die? Did she finally die? And the 10 days and the 7-day celebration was just to give her a proper send-off. The way that he's holding her hand and Mei-Mei's with him, it makes it seem like she's died. But I don't know for sure. That's just my assumption, that she's died. And that he's just sending her off and they have this big celebration. The rumors of the Verdigris house continue to grow. Just how old Grams planned it. I mean, for the woman that owns the brothel, this is all good business because it's like, oh, this wealthy man came and paid to have 7 days and 7 nights of celebration, put out all these lanterns, had all this big celebration. Like, it's just going to make the house seem more and more valuable. And the thing about it is, on her perspective, she's, none of the other courtesans were bought out. So the thing is, MAOMAO wanted to wear this dress to celebrate Mei getting bought out, but instead she's dancing on behalf of her mom, despite the fact that she hates it that her dad showed up and bought her. Like, to do something that would give him praise is something that MAOMAO doesn't want to do. And so Jinshi's like, so who did the strategist buyout? And of course she says, who knows? And he's like, I know you know. He's like, you do know. And she's like, well, no matter how beautiful, she'll be no match for you. I love she tries to throw it back. He's like, you're not answering my question. And she's like, well, you still don't deny it that you're beautiful. I love that she's like, you bitch, you're still not denying that you're a handsome guy. So, the woman who the man bought out won't last long. Nobody told me about the woman who birthed me during the days at the brothel. That's probably the saddest revelation in all of this, is that MAOMAO found out about being Fengxian's daughter through rumors and not them actually telling her. That's the sad thing, is that the old lady didn't want anybody to know. And then everybody was, speaking in rumors about it, and MAOMAO was around. So of course she ended up hearing. And of course, to add to MAOMAO's guilt of feeling worthless, she's like, oh, everybody's saying that I'm the reason that the house almost went under. And she's like, my mom keeps chasing me off because she's ashamed of me. And the reality is the mom is probably ashamed of the fact that she cut off her daughter's finger. But still, and she's heartbroken and mentally unwell, but still, it all kind of adds up to why MAOMAO feels the way that she does about herself. And one thing that I hope in season 2, because MAOMAO has a very low self-esteem when it comes to her own self-worth, is I want Jinshi to make her feel like she's worth more than she believes that she is. And I'm hoping season 2 will give us those moments where Jinshi will let her understand how much she means to him. But what can we do? And then she talks about how the finger can grow back. And she's like, that woman has no memories of being a mother. All she has now is a crooked finger. And MAOMAO always says none of that matters to me anymore. But I'm like, girl, does it not? Does it really not? I do agree, though, when she says she's happy to be Loman's daughter. I'm like, that part I do agree with. I do think that's telling the truth. And so then she's like, well, what is it? And she's like, you can cut off the tip of a finger and it grows back. And then she's like, she's like, damn it, come on now. And so then she's like, oh, my wound opened up. And he's like, oh my God. And then she's just gonna sit down and start sewing her leg back. And she's like, no. She's like, you will be in a sterile environment before you have surgical prep work done, ma'am. I love that MAOMAO. I love the stereotype. It's, again, like a gender reversal role, because so often we see in other shonen that I've read or watched where the guy's like, I'll just sew my arm up, and the female character's like, no, let's get some antiseptic on that, and he's like, I'm a man, I can do it, and just does it himself. And what I like is that here it's reversed, where MAOMAO's like, oh, I'll just sew my leg up, and she's like, don't you need to sterilize that? Like, I love the opposites of it. And then of course he's like, I'm gonna pick you up and I love that he's just like, no, and terrified. And she's like, Jinshi, I can't work like this. And he's like, don't do that here. I love that he just picks her up like a sack of potatoes at first. And he's like, we're getting out of here. Bless him just watching over her. It's so cute. And then he like grabs her and like bridal carries her, which I'm like, I'm also like, MAOMAO, at this point, I would be going, wow, this supposed eunuch has the muscle strength to carry this grown-ass woman across the threshold. Oh, funny that. Or she's like, let me down. He's like, your wound will open up further. She's like, what if, I like that she's like, what if someone sees us? And he's like, girl, I rented out this entire garden. He's like, it's too dark to see anyway. He's like, shh. I love it. And he's like, this is the second time I'm carrying you. Like, he's like, everybody on the castle grounds knows that you're off limits, so we're fine. And she's like, oh yeah, about that. She's like, when I passed out. And then when she's like, this is not the best time, but there's something I've been meaning to ask you. The moment she said that, I was like, she was thinking about getting carried out, which was when she was going to get the Ox Bazor. So the moment she tries to do this fake out, I'm like, bitch, you are fooling no one. We know that you are not going to, in the 11th hour, become this tawdry maiden of virtue that's like, Jinshi, there's something I've been meaning to tell you. You're such a reliable, handsome fellow. Like, bitch ain't gonna say that. No, the part that's such torture is that this anime, it gives us having her have the most beautiful, like, forlorn, yearning face with her mouth open right in front of him. And she just looks so sparkly. And of course, Jinshi's like, she's probably not going to say it, but maybe I can get my hopes up just a little bit. Like she, even when she puts the hand on his like cheek and his eyes are sparkling, I'm like, oh, Jinshi, sweetheart, you were getting played, my dude. And she's so close to his face. Like she could literally kiss him. And she's like, I want that ox bezor, please. Bitch, what? And then she has the cattail swinging. He's like, I love that he headbutts her. He's like, bonk. And she's like, oh. She's like, why'd you headbutt me? My leg's bleeding. He's like, stop teasing me. She's like, you don't have it? And he's like, don't be absurd. And then he's like, I don't even. I love it. And then when she's like, how immature, headbutting me out of nowhere, I'm like, girl, you have no right to call him immature. You both are immature bakas. But then I love that she has the smile, right? MAOMAO is so serious all the time. And she has little self-worth that when she is able to make Jinshi, who is the emperor's brother's son, have these moments of not being so grandeur and being the peacock, but just being like this 19-year-old kid. Like the fact that MAOMAO likes it when he's immature and a little bit childish. I love that. I love it. And I love the smile she gives him. He's easiest to talk to when he's being immature. And that's his true self. That's the thing. I'm like, girl, he's the easiest to talk to when he's like that because that's how he really is. You're talking to the real Jinshi. Only, like, if his name is even Jinshi, you're talking to the real one. Girl, you don't even realize it. So, yeah. Then we get, she's got her bug fungi doing all her things. And then as soon as Jinshi comes, she's like, I like that she's just like getting ready to do something with the bug fungi. And she's like, oh, Master Jinshi's here to see you. I love that any other woman in this entire compound when Jinshi arrived would have been drooling and like army crawling to his feet. But MAOMAO's just like, in the middle of my salad. She's like, really? So I love now that Jinshi mainly just hangs around with Gyokyo. Not only because MAOMAO is in that place, but also because Gyokyo is technically his sister-in-law. Well, wait a minute. He's actually the emperor's son. So Gyokyo is kind of his stepmom in a weird way. And the daughter is kind of his half-sister. But in terms of the role he's playing as the emperor's brother, she's his sister-in-law / stepmom. And the little girl is his half-sister / niece. Not complicated at all. But the fact that there's that family relation there, I feel, is rather important. She's like, everybody's happy to have me back. What's going on? And Jinshi's like, oh, look at you having fun here. And he does the Gendo pose. He's like, well, something interesting came up. And of course, MAOMAO at first is like, oh, what? And she has the cat ear. She's like, interesting. A mystery, you say? A mystery, you say, Watson? He's like, I have something to ask of you. And she says, oh, this again, with her back turned to the audience. But then when we see her like in front, she has the smile on her face like, oh, this again? Well, what would you like for me to do? And then she gives us the smile. Like, all right, fine. We can do this. For this being MAOMAO's story just beginning, I know there's a lot of light novels. I am so excited that we're just barely scratching the surface of what these two are doing. That is so crazy to me. I absolutely love it. Oh, this episode. I would say this is, oh damn, this is hard. I would say episodes 19, 23, and 24 are my top 3. They're my top 3 episodes for sure. There was not a bad episode all season long. They were all good. They were all great episodes. But I definitely believe that the last 2 episodes in episode 19 are my top 3. They're just so good. amazing. So anyway, I'm super excited to hear your thoughts down below on what you all thought of season 1, how you all enjoyed it. And don't worry, I'm definitely going to be able to read these comments as long as there are no light novel spoilers or spoilers for season 2. I'll be checking out these comments and I will talk about any that stand out when we get to season 2. So I've talked for nearly an hour about this show, but it was worth it. So next week we'll be looking at some shorts that go with season 1. See what fun time we have with those. And in the meantime, I hope you all have a wonderful week. Please stay safe, take care, and I'll be back very soon with more of the Apothecary Diaries. Bye.